Hello, my name's Andra, and I'm going to be presenting dog food through the notions discussed during this semester. Throughout the semester, we talked about the embodied film experience and how it's made up of notions such as the affective mimicry, film tactility, the cinematic ethics, the gaze, and film genre. So first, we're going to start with defining affective mimicry. So in class, we could define affective mimicry through a way of saying that affective means to influence or something or someone, which relates to the affect theory and how we learned it explains the overall experience of films and how it shows the connections between the physiological sensations, the intellectual reflections, and moods. The second part of the word is mimicry, which is just to copy anything in general. In this case, it copies movements, behaviors, and feelings through seeing someone else experience those things. We use something called emotional contagions from seeing someone else existing in a film to make us feel the same way. And we see that the mise en scène includes the music of the film and can set a tone and mood for the narrative to follow, which affects how we see the film and how affective mimicry is used in the film. Music and sound can also affect the film and how it uses affective mimicry to make us feel the same way that the mise en scène can. From the readings, affective mimicry was defined as emotional contagion results in part from the observation of another posture, gesture, voice, and or facial expressions, as Carl Platinga said in The Central Medium. In the film, we saw examples of this notion in a clip where he feels happy because he is happy that he's flirting with this cute girl, new girl in town, and we see that the lighting is nice and that their body language is inviting to each other. We can also just know that the music is also happy at the moment and that we only see their happiness. Nothing is tense. It's all nice, and the camera shots are framed in a way that we see his reaction and how he looks at her, and then the camera switches to his perspective of seeing her. In this third clip, we see that her face is scared, which makes us confused since we feel happy because he's smiling at first. The lighting has gotten more dim again, and the tension is rising. As the audience, we see that the shots are speeding up and that his smile starts to fade, and we become confused and scared, just like the main character begins to be. The movie is using affective mimicry through the camera shots, the music becoming more intense, and the escalating fear of the main character's face being shown up close to us to make us feel scared and in suspense. Now we will start with film tactility. In class, we could summarize that film tactility was defined as the technical definition of tactility, which is to feel being touched or how you react to the sensation of touch. Films use techniques like this to shape how you experience the film through your body, as the film makes you relate to a character and therefore feel what the character feels and senses. It is a relation of contact, like the slides on June 9th say. Film tactility can be seen when you see the character's body, so how they do things and what they do using their body language and facial expressions. The film's body, which is the mise en scène, the filter and movements of the camera and sound, and the spectator's body, which is the reactions of an audience, both physical and emotional, and thoughts during the film. From the readings, we can define film tactility as these embodied emotional experiences may begin in and on the surface of the body, but they become to involve the entire body and to register as movement, comportment, tension, internal rhythms, and a full-bodied engagement with the materiality of the world, as seen in the introduction Eye Contact by Barker on page 1 to 2. Some examples of this notion in dog food are, in this second clip, we feel her cheek on his and how she's whispering to him, And we know that the music is romantic and the sound is really focused on her voice right now. The focus and the clearness of her voice in this clip is so intense that we can even hear the wind in her voice a little bit, in my opinion. And so because of this focus on her voice, the film establishes film tactility to the sound of her voice, because we kind of get the wind and the raspiness of her voice coming through, so we feel the air blowing out of her mouth. We also get a close-up shot of her cheek on his cheek, and so all we can think about is her voice on our cheek and subsequently the visual input of her cheek on ours, so we feel the warmth and the wind from this imagery, sound, and film tactility. Next, we're going to be defining the gaze. From the readings, we define the gaze as watching a film, which is certainly not in the film, but you're not entirely outside of it either, as Barker says on page 12. In class, we defined the film gaze as like an experience of the movie and how the audience exists in the world of the movie, from the reading that we saw as well. We can make up the cinematic gaze through 3 different types of gazes, being the spectator's gaze, which is when you can see the main character and what the main character is looking at, so we see a lot of information, which is more than what any of the characters would see. We can see the camera's perspective, which also gives us a lot of information, and we get context from this. And we can also see the character's gaze, which embodies the experience of a character by seeing his perspective, their perspective of the film, and what they're looking at. This clip, we can see that the film is showing us what he's looking at, and then it switches to his own perspective, which proves that we are seeing the film from his gaze. We also get clips of his face and what he looks at, and then the camera switches to focus on what he was looking at, which is a fancier way of saying it. This way, we really experience what he's seeing and how he feels about it, which is just forcing us to experience the film through his own eyes, basically. Next notion we're going to be talking about is genres. So in class, we define genre from the video in the class notes on June 23rd. We learned that the genre is a French word meaning type. So it also means to define the type of film you're watching. And the type of film is determined through all the film elements, like the mise en scène, sound, filter, and cultural context, which determines genre. There has to be at least more than one film of a certain new genre in order to call it a genre. So it's just a trend of combination of film elements. In dog food, I would say that there are multiple genres, but most clearly a horror genre, from the gore and the bloodiness of the film. In our society, we tend to categorize blood and violence in films with horror. The loud and intense music also helps to set a mood of fear to experience horror in this film. We also talk about cinematic ethics. So in class, we define cinematic ethics along the lines of learning that films are an ethical experience when we view cinema through analyzing cinema, using the gaze, effective mimicry, and other notions discussed previously. These notions in film can generate ethical reflection, and cinema can be viewed as an unethical because it shows unethical media, but it can also be seen as transformative in society because it questions our environment and makes us think about what we see and experience. Cinematic ethics is constructed by the ethics in cinema, which is just the ethical situation in the narrative. There is also the ethics of cinematic representation, which is just the ethical issue that the film makes us question from film elements. And finally, the ethics of cinema, which is just the ethical values within the cinematic context of the film in the social, cultural, and historical aspects of the film world. The film devices we discussed are used to construct the cinematic ethics in film. So cinematic ethics are also involved when we discuss types of films. and how they make you feel, not just think. I present the feel-bad film also, which is when directors choose to elicit negative emotions from their audience in order to open up a discussion and reflection about the ethics of the film. Some feel-bad film can elicit strong reactions that can hold transformative power to counter ignorance, but it could also be seen as an unethical movie that should not happen, according to some people. From the readings, we can also define cinematic ethics as if cinema is concerned with gestures as well as with images, actions, emotions, and experience, then aesthetics must join forces with ethics and politics in order for us to understand the medium's philosophical as well as cultural historical significance. Cinematic Ethics by Cinderbrick on page 3. Examples of this notion is seen in Dog Food in the following clips. In the first clip, we question if it's right to give death threats in general. This moment builds tension and suspense in a happy film so far. This questions the ethics of cinematic representation because this happens in the real world a lot, mostly online, and many are too told to ignore it. But is it really as easy as just putting it down and letting it pile up? The easygoing music, despite the death threats and his voice reading them, forces us to think about the death threats and the idea they represent ethically. In this third clip, we question if it was right to kill the vegetarians because he thought they killed his dog. Or was it ethical to feed his dog humans? This is ethics of cinema because some people may think it was okay to kill the people for killing his dog, but in real life he would have just been convicted for murder either way, despite the morality of food choices involved. The violent imagery and loud sound makes us question if his reaction was justified or not by seeing how severe he reacted. And now we're going to define the film experience from the readings we had to have done. Our perceptual experiences of a film is thus not a mechanistic method of receiving, processing, and integrating a film's sensory information, but rather an active, dynamic set of perceptual processes that are proactive and creative. The bottom line, however, is widely recognized, namely that aesthetics and perception are not separate, but rather common in dialogical layers. By Louis Rocha Antunes in the Multisensory Film Experience on page 5. From the introduction assignment, my answers to the first question were detailed, but I did not analyze what I noticed and what it meant, and its connection to our world. I was able to describe my reaction when I said, quote-unquote, recoil in disgust when it seemed like they were eating the dog food. It seems like they were eating the dog for food. But I did not explain how the mise en scène and cinematic ethics in the film made me feel this way. In my second question, I also realized that the film experience to the world and social context like stereotypes. But now I know it's wrong, because I should not have related the film experience to the world and social context like I did, because we learned that the film experience is really an embodied and ethical experience, which is defined by the notions I discussed previously throughout this semester. In the third question of the assignment, I also feel that my third answer is correct, just not detailed enough. And now that I reflect on my answers, with my new knowledge, I feel like the ethics in film are shown through the notions discussed in my presentation and in class. And those can be manipulated by directors to create a unique film experience. Which is the way that we experience the film, which defines the film itself. Thank you very much.